everyone, to another Beethewellness podcast. This one here is episode number 24, and you're getting the solo Adam Lambert show. My beautiful bride is out doing the damn thing in Paris for her mom's 60th birthday, which is awesome. So they're out there chilling and doing their thing. So you get just me today, similar to the way that you had just Vanessa last Sunday or Wednesday or whenever that podcast seemed to come out. So today, in sort of similar fashion, you're going to get a little bit more science. Well, actually, not really science, but just theory of kind of the principles of our program and some stuff like that. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in here. So one of the things, I've been kind of trying to figure out what exactly I was going to talk about today, because actually, as Vanessa mentioned, I think in her solo podcast, for some reason, it's challenging to do these by yourself. Like, it would almost be easier if you pretended that you had, I don't know, somebody to deal with, like a sound guy, like you just had a pretend sound guy that you could talk to every now and then. I think it would be easier. But anyway, what I kind of landed on was, I read this morning a article on mental toughness that came from one of the guys that I follow pretty closely, Joel Jamieson, who's a professional strength and conditioning coach, and he's super dialed in. He's probably one of the leading experts on energy system development. He's the Bioforce HRV guy. He's really dialed, and he's had some pretty good articles recently, and this one was no exception. So after reading it, I kind of came away realizing that maybe I haven't done a good enough job in this program expressing some of the why that we're doing stuff, especially when it comes to the strength and conditioning component. And he brought up some really good points about motivation and mental toughness with regard to your understanding of the value of the training that you're doing. So in this article, Joel is talking about the Daniel Kahneman. I think it's Kahneman. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce his last name. Daniel Kahneman's model of decision making, which from some of the other reading and studying that I've done on the way that the mind works and this sort of determinism versus actual decision making stuff. This might be kind of an oversimplification, honestly, but I think it works really good for the context of our program and certainly for this discussion or monologue, as it were. So the kind of the long and short of it is that our brains and our bodies as a whole have this sort of innate and distinct desire to conserve energy. So we want to do things the easiest and least energy demanding way possible, right? So this has a lot of kind of evolutionary underpinnings, right? Where there were obviously times in our past, and for some people, times in our current, where limited food was a problem and stuff like that. So we didn't want to necessarily have our brains and our bodies running at full tilt all the time for no reason. So it made sense that we were able to sort of do things very efficiently, and even down to the cellular level of energy production. And it seems to affect everything throughout the body, right? And the brain here being absolutely no different. So we have this innate desire to minimize energy expenditure, right? And then on the other side of the coin, we have this need to be able to make energy efficient decisions, right? We're talking about brain energy for the most part, energy efficient decisions that affect our survival, right? So this is another evolutionary thing, right? So we're trying to minimize energy, but then we need to make a decision. So we need a way to efficiently make rapid decisions, right? So these are kind of like snap judgments where you don't need to be 100% accurate. Close is good enough. You just need to be able to look at something and make a decision about it quickly and see how it pertains to you, right? So like a stranger shows up. Is that person a threat? Yes, no. This is that decision is what's called a system one decision, right? So this is made solely by the subconscious, based on dopaminergic patterns of risk versus gain from previous experience, and then maybe morphic resonance. If you ever want to sort of blow your mind, check out a guy named Rupert Sheldrake and check out his stuff on morphic resonance base. basically he has an incredibly compelling theory that somehow through DNA or collective consciousness or something, we pass on these significant events from generation to generation to generation to generation, sometimes even skip multiple generations. And they've done it in rat studies and stuff. Anyway, Rupert Sheldrake, Morphic resonance, check it out. But the bottom line is these system one decisions are based at the subconscious level, and it's a dopamine driven pattern recognition, risk versus gain thing that happens, right? So, and this is where the sort of the determinism argument is being made these days, where, well, you didn't make that choice. The choice was already made in your brain and it bubbled up as a choice, but that was already done, right? So we don't need to get into that argument, or not necessarily argument, but that whole thing right now, because like I said, this oversimplification works pretty good for what we're talking about here. So this idea that we see this person, right? This stranger cruises in, and we determine if we need to make some sort of immediate response to their presence. Is this person a threat? Yes or no? So if no, then maybe we just leave it alone and we don't need to go any farther than that. We don't put any further thought into who this person is, what they might be doing here, any of that. It's just they're here, they're a threat, or they're not a threat. We're done, right? Unless we see some value in knowing more about that person, right? So one of the tricky things about value, and it's a little bit nebulous, but I'll try to kind of cover it here as much as I can. So let's say once this person is perceived as a value, right? So you determine that they weren't a threat. Now you've perceived them as some sort of value or perceived some sort of value in knowing more about them, finding the exact answer about where they came from, what they're doing here, or something like that, or sort of outside of this context, but there's some sort of value in completing the work, for a much more finite term. Then we start to see system 2 come into play, right? So system 2 is our analytical, higher thinking mind, and this is done at the conscious level. So this is how we solve complex equations and comprehend complex articles and topics and stuff like that. So if you're still listening to this, you might be starting to tap into system 2. If you ignored me, or if you've already stopped, then system 1 determined that the risk versus gain on this thing just wasn't any good, and you went with that decision, right? So this analytical, higher thinking, conscious level decision making is like an incredibly amazing ability, right? Our brains, we are problem solving monkeys. Like, that's the deal. We just figure stuff out, and this is a large part of our whole existence, right? So it's an amazing ability, and we can use it to override system 1 decisions. But this requires quite a bit of energy, right? So we really only tap into this system 2 decision making when we can see a large enough value in the outcome. That makes sense. So outside of basic human needs, this perceived value, of course, is largely individual, right? So we all want food, shelter, company, stuff like that. But outside of that, now you start to get into this thing where it's like, well, I don't know, is this valuable to me or not? Am I going to put any more effort into deciding whether or not I want to continue to do this? Or do I just go with whatever my gut said, right? Or in this case, we say your gut, but really it's, largely some combination of your gut and your brain. So in Joel's article, he's talking specifically about mental toughness to push through pain and fatigue and, in some sort of pursuit of an athletic endeavor, right? He trains a lot of combat athletes, like professional fighters. And so it's a huge part of what they talk about. But this mental toughness thing comes, it sort of goes across the board, right? This is something that we talk about, when it comes to diet, right? So whether or not, it kind of comes more into play that the normal terminology when it comes to diet is willpower. And I don't, not to confuse the two things at all, but let me just give you another example of how this sort of process works, right? So you walk by a donut shop, and based on your previous experiences with donuts, your brain starts producing dopamine in the eat the donut area of your brain, right? Whatever that is, so that you start to elicit a higher neurochemical response that's leaning you towards making this snap judgment based on your perception of value of eating the donut or not eating it. All right. So if you're new to the idea that donuts may be sort of antithetical to your health goals, then system one is likely going to decide that you should eat the donut, because that's been what you've done in the past. It's you received an incredible reward from it before. So now your body's just trying to get that reward again. So now the opportunity for your newfound sort of anti-donut fervor to bump this decision up the priority list and get system two involved. All right. So if you have enough, wherewithal to have put not eating donuts somewhere on your priority list of conscious thought, and it matters enough to that part of your psyche, then now system two will enable you to consciously think your way through the problem and avoid the donut, right? So keeping in mind that system two is largely glucose dependent, right? So this happens to be one of those centers of the brain that runs really well off sugar. I mean, there's a few different kinds in there that can only run on sugar. And we know that ketones play a role in some of this. And if you're jacked up on ketones, then maybe you can make better decisions as well. But the bottom line is, if you're physically fatigued, mentally fatigued, haven't eaten in a while, have low relative blood sugar to what's considered normal for you, then it's going to be even harder to convince your body to expend this energy on putting rational thought into countering the decision that was made by system one, right? So I know this is kind of a lot of round and around in circles, and you probably have no idea where I'm going with it. So how does this play into being motivated for your workouts? Because that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here specifically. And the bottom line is, if you know the value of the training that you're doing, if you're able to establish that as a value in your mind, then you're way more likely to actually do it and push through the tough spots. And it may even inspire you in a positive way to kind of change your attitude about the way that you're working out. And it may start to feel like fun, because now all of a sudden you see value in it. And so then it's no longer work, right? Or less like work. So what I was hoping to do is kind of in that vein is go through the types of training that we do and try to put them in some sort of a context so that you can understand at least what we think are valuable about these things and why they're in the program for the most part. Some of it's just random, but very little. Most of it's very well thought out and calculated, I promise. So this may get a little bit geeky, but that's because I'm kind of a geek when it comes to this stuff. So from the top, at the beginning of the day, 5-minute warm up. So this is incredibly critical, especially if you train first thing in the morning or if you train in a cold climate. And the number one goal here is to literally wake your body up, start to reconnect the neuromuscular pathways, the things that have kind of gone to sleep, with your sedentary, whether you just got up in the morning or whether you've been sitting all day, something. You need to literally just make those electrical connections and start to get that stuff going. The other thing is you want to literally generate some heat. So you're trying to get your body up to a warmer temperature, make things a little bit more loose and pliable, and just kind of get that stuff going, right? So we need to get the blood and interstitial fluid flowing and start to loosen up any sort of adhesions and micro adhesions and stuff that you may have started to develop from being still. Sometimes as part of the repair process from, say, yesterday or the day before's workout, something like that. So we need to start getting that stuff loose. And then it also is going to prime your mitochondria, right? So your body's starting to look at an increased workload, and it takes it a little bit of time to ramp up its energy production. So this nice 5-minute warm-up is doing just that. It's priming things, ramping up your energy production, and starting to recruit more muscle, which is super cool, right? Next up, usually, is some sort of a dynamic warm-up for us. And the goal here is sort of a continuation of your 5-minute warm-up, but this has a lot more to do with getting your brain and your muscles on the same page. So, like, for example, if you're woken up in the middle of the night from a dead sleep and try to pick up your phone or a glass of water or something next to the bed, and nothing seems to work. You're reaching out and you're trying to use your hand, but it doesn't work. You drop the glass, you drop your phone or whatever. When your system goes offline, it takes a little bit of time to reboot. And the same kind of thing happens if you've been sitting all day and then you go work out. Your body has conditioned itself throughout the day to use the least amount of energy to do what it's doing. And sometimes that means shutting things off. And so you need to turn things back on and wake things back up and get your body used to working together in a coordinated fashion again. And so like a large part of the DROM, this dynamic range of motion workout or warm up that we do is working on timing. And it's the timing of when you try to initiate a movement and your brain sends the signals and then the muscle does what it's supposed to do, right? So we need to put a little bit of thought into waking that stuff up and getting it used to this sort of core to extremity movement pattern that we try to get people to do. Getting your muscles to fire in the appropriate order, so to speak. And this is how most people injure their backs, right? I mean, how many people do you know that have, when they throw their back out, they, bent down to pick up a piece of paper, or they, reached out from an off foot to open a door, right? Nothing heavy loaded, no fast, crazy movement. Something just got out of line. And usually what it comes down to is some sort of a misfire, and the appropriate muscles weren't engaged for the kind of movement that you were doing. So the DROM is going to activate these muscles, especially in these incredibly important stabilizer muscles of your core. So all of your abdominal muscles, your spinal erectors, all of this stuff, your shoulders and your hips, all of this musculature that keeps you from slumping and falling and just sort of collapsing like one of those little spring-loaded giraffe toys or whatever. Those muscles are what we're trying to wake up and trying to get fired up so that they are loaded and recruited and ready to go when we actually do our workouts. And so then last but not least, the DROM is kind of a stretch, right? So we're stretching, but in a dynamic way. And it will increase range of motion and get things warmed up and loosened up in a way that does not reduce force production like static stretching will. So this is one of the issues with static stretching before you work out, is that lengthening tends to reduce the amount of force production that your muscles are willing to deliver later on in your workout. So static stretching is cool post-workout. Pre-workout, not the greatest idea. So the next up on the list is mobility. And we use the mobility stuff for all kinds of things, right? This is all of our smashing and the odd, funky pigeon and all the various things that we have you guys doing. And we could really spend a lot of time talking about this one. And one of these days on the podcast, we'll get somebody like maybe Glenn Cordoza or Kelly Starrett on here to talk about it. And we can go super deep on all the cool nuances. But for the most part, the overall goal of the mobility work that we're doing is to create the space for your body to move naturally. So that sounds a little bit nebulous. You're like, of course, what else would we be doing here, right? But what we really want to do is manipulate your joints and soft tissue structures in a way that allows for free movement function and normal movement function, so that when you do the workout, you're more likely to use the appropriate form. So if you can't get into a squat unloaded and unstressed in a nice healthy position, it's going to be really difficult to do that when you're loaded. So the idea is that we want to get in, manipulate the joints, open up the hip capsules, get everything ready to go, and then go about our lift, right? So over time, when you couple this mobility stuff with appropriate strength training to follow it up, it helps you stay injury-free and perform way better by maintaining these healthy positions and supportive joint structures throughout these movements. So that's mobility. And strength. This doesn't seem like probably that big of a mystery. I think everyone is pretty savvy that it's incredibly important to be strong, and especially get as strong as you possibly can as you age, because it deteriorates quickly. And it's the older you are, the more difficult it is to put on muscle mass and maintain strength, right? So deteriorating mass is a huge factor when you consider aging. And strength training is pretty much the best way to maintain that mass. You got to use it. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it, is really the situation with both bone density and muscle mass. So strength training provides a pretty cool metabolic advantage as well, because there's There's more muscle, right? So the more muscle you have, the more energy you burn at rest, which is pretty significant for fat loss. Knowing that at rest you're burning 100% oxidative energy system, which we know the body likes to burn fat to do that. So if you've got a bunch of muscle, it's going to burn more fat when you're just sitting around. And that you have to be careful because that can make you eat more as well. So there's definitely that whole situation. But putting on muscle mass and coupling it with an intelligent diet plan is a really good way to lose fat. It also, the strength training makes you more insulin sensitive, which is pretty significant. Most of that is post-workout, but it's still pretty helpful, right? Your body's getting used to, translocating its GLUT4 receptors and sucking the sugar out of your blood without insulin. So you need less and less insulin in order to get that the fuels out into the cells where they're needed, right? So that's pretty helpful for a lot of different reasons. It helps curb cravings for sure, and it can really help transition away from a highly processed food reward kind of standard American diet. So when people try to change just their diet alone, often it's pretty challenging, and it's something that it was kind of an approach that we used to take. We're like, okay, well, we're just going to have you clean up your diet and then we'll work on the strength and conditioning later. And what we found is that it makes it a lot easier if you do both. If you do some resistance training, some strength training while you're switching up your diet, it makes it a lot easier to stay compliant. You don't have nearly the sort of roller coaster that you might otherwise. And then lastly, the strength training is awesome for bone density. I mean, that is really how our body decides whether or not we need to put on bone density or maintain bone density, or if it's not that big of a deal anymore, right? So if the sort of two ends of the spectrum are like Olympic power lifters or Olympic weightlifters who have this explosive, incredibly high load, and the other end is like astronauts on the space station who have zero gravity, right? And so they see significant bone loss while they're in space. And you look at Olympic weightlifters and they've got incredible bone density. And those are just sort of the two opposite ends of the spectrum. So, my advice to astronauts is that they O-lift when they're on Earth. Yeah. So not that none of them have ever asked, but if I was to speak to an astronaut, that would be the direction I would go with their, the general line of training. So you may have noticed over the course of the year, or however long you've been with us, if you've been with us for more than a season, you will hopefully have noticed that there's some kind of a pattern and definitely a change in the way that we program our strength and conditioning. So we get a change in training volume and a change in intensity. And more or less, what we're trying to do is take you from a reintroduction to exercise and recovery phase in like early October, which nobody's done that yet, but we're coming into that one. And then into a hypertrophy stage where we're literally trying to put on muscle mass, and then a strength accumulation phase, a power production phase, and then on to conditioning and maintenance, and then finally back around to reintroduction and recovery. So the basic model is to rehab your current injuries, prehab, see what I did there, prehab, potential problem areas, develop quality movement, and then on top of those quality movements, we're going to build muscle, and then we're going to make that muscle strong, and then we're going to make that muscle fast, and then we're going to build the engine that drives it all. And then we're going to use it for the sport of life, for whatever it is that we want to do during our season. And it's not to say that, we're not going to be working on conditioning while we're building muscle, and we're not going to be building muscle while we're working on conditioning, but there's just an emphasis to the training. And that's what allows us to kind of get through this cyclical nature and sort of cover all the bases without you guys having to spend, 6 hours a week in the gym, or double days or whatever it is that you would need to do to get this kind of stuff in, if you were a pro athlete. So we use this, under that model, we use this combination of unilateral and bilateral work. So like the difference there being back squat versus a reverse lunge, right? So very similar movement, and we're moving a lot of the same muscles and all that, but they challenge the body in different ways. And it's important to do both. So that's why they're two separate things, squat and reverse lunge. And the reason is that we tend to develop these imbalances. Like one side of us is going to be significantly stronger than the other. One movement pattern is going to be stronger than the other. So we have to switch that kind of stuff up. And so when you let's say you're, back squat 300 pounds. When you go to do your reverse lunge, it's going to be a fraction of that, maybe 40%. But you'll find that one side is significantly stronger than the other. So as you do the reverse lunges to shore up that imbalance, now your back squat goes up dramatically because you're driving from both sides. And it makes it much safer for you. So when you have an imbalance, especially in your hip structure and in your lower leg musculature, or I should say upper leg musculature, what tends to happen, and you can watch Olympic weightlifters when they do this, when they're under incredibly heavy load, you'll see rotation start to occur, right? And that rotation is usually the result of a strength imbalance. And when you start to rotate between your hips and your shoulders, that's when you open yourself up for injury, right? So for this midline stability component, we focus on anti-rotation. So we're not going to do Roman chair twists to make your abs stronger. We're going to have you hold your midline stable and challenge you in a rotation manner. So you're keeping your body from rotating, anti-rotation. Same thing for flexion and extension. We're not going to have you do crunches and back extensions. I mean, maybe good mornings are about the closest thing we're going to get to back extensions, but no, crunches, no straight up back extensions. Instead, we're going to challenge your body to maintain a neutral spine under various external loads. So like planking, side planking, good mornings, deadlifts, stuff like that. All right. So that's how we're going to be doing this midline stability training, for lack of a better term, right? So, yeah, strength's super important. I mean, everything's easier when you're strong. That's the bottom line. And there's never going to be a day that it's easier to get strong than today, unless you are Benjamin Button, all right? So unless you've got whatever he had, pretty much get going now, because it's just going to get worse as you get older. Get in there and start training that stuff. And that's, we just really can't emphasize it enough. I mean, in the program, we offer these body weight options and this kind of stuff that's in there. And that's really good as a place to start and to get start greasing the groove and get things going. But at some point, we're going to need you to start lifting some weight. And if that means, I wish that there was a way that I could spend a day with each of you, and just kind of get this whole thing dialed in. But until we sort out some kind of, hologram, it just doesn't seem like that's possible. So even if it means you have to go spend some time with a trainer, get these 5-6 movements, the ones that you're uncomfortable with. Go hire a trainer, get comfortable with those movements, and then get after it and start lifting. And it's totally manageable. It just seems a little bit sketchy. And frankly, it might be. If it feels sketchy, it probably is. But somebody who knows what they're doing in person could spend 3-4 hours with you and dial all this stuff in. And that's probably something that if the going up in weight or adding weight is feeling like something that you're not comfortable doing, that's definitely what I would recommend. At some point, the body weight stuff's just not really going to get you where we want to go within the context of our program. So I know we've talked about that before. So conditioning. So these are everyone's little favorite little parts of these workouts, I'm sure. And so there's several different kinds here, right? So we'll talk about sprints first. And sprints can be broken down into kind of two different categories for what we're talking about. One being short sprints and the other being long sprints. And it's super technical, right? For the most part, anything over 20 seconds, we're going to consider a long sprint. At that point, you've really sort of changed energy systems and you're kind of doing a different thing. So the short sprints are much more like strength or power training, right, than they are conditioning, which is why we usually kind of put them on their own within the program. So you might do sprints and, the normal warm-up, DROM, mobility, sprint, and then that's it. They can be pretty challenging, to your energy systems, to your neurological system, the whole Marianne, right? So these short sprints are much more like strength and power exercises, like I said. So they're super critical for fat loss, especially when you start to get down to the last few pounds, the last couple of percentages of body fat that you're looking to get rid of. The sprints may well be the missing link. They tend to jack up your metabolism for quite a while, like up to 48 hours, meaning that the muscle that you do have is burning more fat at rest, or more calories in general, but fat usually at rest than they would be normally. So this kind of long-lasting metabolic effect is a pretty huge part of it. And then they seem to, at the epigenetic level, they turn on some genes that promote lean body mass. So if you look at sprinters, it's very seldom that you see a fat sprinter. And it's not because they've been doing tons of cardio. The sprints work really well for fat loss, especially the shorter ones. The longer sprints now, and this is anything over 20 seconds or so. So like for us, that's the 20-second sprints, the 400 meters, the stuff like that. They're getting more into kind of the pure conditioning realm from this perspective, right? So they're usually what we're trying to do there is blow you through your anaerobic threshold and then sustain that power output for 15 to 60 seconds. Here, the adaptations that we see are mostly energy system related, meaning that you're becoming more efficient at producing energy. You get increased mitochondrial density, so your muscle cells are gonna develop more mitochondria in order to make more power and be able to sustain this kind of movement. They tend to work really good for heart rate recovery and recovering from workouts in general. So when you're doing these sort of 15 to 60 second sprints, that recovery that you gain, or that what do I want to say? The energy system work, the adaptations that you've gained from those sort of sprints are what help you recover between sets of back squats, right? So it's that same kind of thing that's going on there, except it's just another way to do it, so you don't have to squat every day. So these sort of longer sprint sessions are pretty rough on your energy system, though. So we keep them pretty few and far between. So this is sort of that middle ground. It's on the high end of the middle ground, but it's definitely in the middle ground where you can pretty easily burn yourself out and torch yourself. So these we keep pretty minimal. Super important. Don't skip them, but just don't add any. Keep them right in there. Although I don't know anyone who goes out for fun and runs 400s. Maybe people who normally have to run 800s, they'll go run a 400 or two for the heck of it. But for the most part, that's, nobody's doing those. Not a lot of recreational 400 meter athletes out there. Next one, everybody's favorites, these sort of sub 12-minute acronyms, right? These are all of our EMOMs and AMRAPs and, partitioned AMRAPs and all the good stuff that we've been doing for the last couple of months. These are about sustained power output in that 1 minute to 5 minute range. Generally, they're based around strength movements as opposed to the monostructural stuff like running or rowing. And we do this for a couple of reasons. One is that we want to reduce repetitive use injuries. So we've already got you running for stuff like the sprints, or biking, let's say, for stuff like the sprints. Now we need to elicit a little bit different energy response, and we're going to do it in a way that is not using the same repetitive motion as running or biking, right? That's the idea. So that's one reason. Another reason that we really like these is that it uses the entire body in a coordinated effort, right? So it's not an isolation movement. Like to a large degree, cycling, especially on a spin bike, is a lower body movement. There's definitely bracing and there's stuff like that happens in your upper body, but I would not consider that a total body coordinated effort as compared to thrusters or dumbbell snatches or even standing press, right? Those are a much more, coordinated effort, let's say. The other thing we really like about them is that it's pretty easy to track meaningful progress. So the way that they're done is it's always some kind of as many as you can in a given time frame type of a thing. Or, for the most part, that's the way we do them. And so you can look, and from time to time that you do it, you can see that you're progressing. You're using the same amount of weight, the same, full quality movement, whatever it is. And now you can do more reps than you could to the last time you did the workout or 2 weeks ago or whatever. And that's a huge motivator because it's quantifiable. Even if you don't really have any like real life contextual way to process or show value in, well, now I can do 6 reps in my AMRAP instead of 5. Like that doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but you know that you're progressing and it's working. And that's a huge motivator, right? So the tracking meaningful progress thing is a pretty cool aspect of those. And it's one of the reasons that we use them quite a bit, probably more so than a lot of the other movement stuff that we do. And then of course they cause some pretty significant adaptations, right? They work really good. They work good at getting you in shape. They work good for fat loss. They work pretty good for fat loss while maintaining muscle mass, which is a pretty good thing. And if you keep them short, like we do in that, less than 10 to 12 minute range, you can hit them pretty hard without really burning yourself out. It's not like the 45-minute, 50-minute chipper workouts that you'll find, that those things are pretty brutal. And maybe once a month or something, you should do that if you want. We probably won't be doing any of those. But the bottom line is they work really good, lower risk of burning yourself out. And so that's kind of the minimum effective dose idea, right? So we're doing just enough to elicit the maximum response, the maximum adaptation without blowing yourself up, which is cool. And the other thing that's good about the acronym workouts, these short ones, is that they support strength training pretty well. So they're, like we said, they're basically generally based around strength movements anyway, which is cool. So you're getting a little bit of volume in there, which is kind of helpful for maintaining muscle mass and building muscle mass. But they also don't necessarily interfere with your strength training. So you can do them on a strength day post. So you go do your strength workout just like we normally do, and then do your Metcon after your primary strength session. And you're not necessarily going to cause training interference like you would if you did your strength session and then went out and ran 60 minutes of low intensity cardio, right? So you can get that short, intense session in without really messing up your strength session. As long as, this is completely dependent on how well you're recovering. So if you're one of these folks who's tinkering with the idea of adrenal fatigue, you should really skip the WODs for sure. These short ones are going to burn you down probably, or you can, talk to us about maybe how to modulate that stuff a little bit. But, yeah, for the most part, they're going to work pretty good and they're not going to burn you out as long as you're recovering adequately. So if you don't have any of the signs of overtraining, if you're sleeping fine and your hunger's normal and your muscle mass is normal and you're not starting to just get black bags under your eyes and store fat in weird places, then you're probably, recovering well. Like that's the idea, right? So speaking of recovery, next up on the list here is the cool down. And the cool downs are really important. It's funny because in the beginning of the program, for those of you who remember or have been around from the beginning, we didn't include the cool downs. And the only reason that we didn't do that was because we just felt like there was too many things to do in a day. But someone mentioned, how important cool downs was and that they were surprised that they weren't in the workout. And I was like, okay, fine. One person asked for it. Here they come. And so we've introduced them, and I'm glad that somebody spoke up because everybody seems to be stoked on them, and everybody seems to like the half moon stretch, which is by far my favorite as well. But this cool down session is a chance to move your body through some of the more critical ranges of motion that we use during the workouts. So they're usually a similar thing, which that can suck sometimes. So like the hip flow, for instance, after a heavy squat day, the last thing you want to do is slowly squat and internally and externally rotate your hips, right? But the idea is to relax and lengthen the muscles that you fired up and start to transition back into parasympathetic drive, where you're kind of shutting down that stress response, starting to rest and relax and get the fluids moving. And there's no better way to do that than to move through those ranges of motion. You're going to be way better off doing that than you will just flopping down on the couch, right? So this is also an opportunity to teach your body how you expect it to move when it's fatigued. So you need to set this expectation for your body that it still moves appropriately when it's torched. Otherwise, you subconsciously, you start to prioritize completing the work over doing the work well. And I think that there's a huge disconnect here where just get the rep done. Just get the rep done. You're like, no. You're tired, you're fatigued, but you still have to do this correctly. And that's a very important thing for us, because when you get fatigued and start prioritizing work completion over doing it well, that's when you really start to, open yourself up for injury. And you're missing a large component, because who cares? Who cares if you can do that work if in reality you can't do what you're doing well, right? So, our bodies are incredibly adaptable, and we're literally adapting to whatever it is that you're doing right now. Right. So the idea is we want to spend as much time doing things that you want to adapt to as possible. Like, how stoked are you to adapt to sitting in an uncomfortable chair? Like, what that really looks like is, poor posture and tight hip flexors, and generally like a frown, right? Versus adapting to spending time outside and walking around and swimming and carrying on and laughing and smiling and being a good human, right? That's a better thing to adapt to, So we got to look at that balance. And I mean, we talk about it all the time. It's like spending 60 minutes in the gym isn't going to offset the other 23 hours of, bad posture, bad positioning, poor movement, and all those kind of things. So, kind of reminds me of something so Greg Glassman, the CrossFit founder or leader or whatever you want to call him, he said once in an interview that it was a pretty good interview, but he was talking about the sort of the argument in CrossFit about form versus work capacity. So, and the question always comes up, well, if I do it that fast, I can't do it that well, right? Is kind of the idea. And it's like if you ask someone to do a job and they ask you, okay, I'll do the job, but do you want it done well or do you want it done on time? And the answer, of course, is both. I want it both done well and on time. Like, that's what I'm looking for here. That's the goal. And they don't need to be mutually exclusive, right? It can be done that way. So this was like one of the original premises of CrossFit, but somewhere along the line, people started to kind of lean towards more towards the time component than the well component, right? So there was this idea in the beginning that I want you to do this perfectly, quickly, right? And then that's very difficult to do. And it was difficult to train, and it was difficult to get people to stick with that and to get the intensities that we're looking for when in this sort of this competitive environment. So you just kind of saw this natural tendency to lean more towards, well, I'll go with 80% form to be number one on the chalkboard, right? And I mean, I think that whole thing has sort of sorted itself out in a lot of the gyms out there, and you're starting to see people making a point of achieving both accuracy and intensity, right, for lack of a better term. And you're starting to see people that are definitely spending time training quality as a priority in their movement, which is cool. There's just a natural progression, right? I mean, there's going to be spikes that come up of just, none of this matters. We're just going for blood. And then eventually it simmers back down and becomes a much more sane thing, which I think is where we're seeing most of the gyms going now. So this is sort of where, you have to pay attention to programming for the audience. And where a lot of coaches seem to fall short here is that they make one program that works for someone and try to apply it to somebody else. All right. So you might make a conditioning workout using high rep Olympic lifting, which is hard to say for some reason. And that might be totally fine for an Olympic athlete like Dmitry Klokov, right? This guy, if you don't know who he is, you should just Google him. Common spelling, Dmitry Klokov. He's this massive Russian weightlifter who you could give him a workout of 135 pound snatches for time, and he can fly through that with zero chance of getting injured unless something crazy happened and he dropped the weight on his head, right? Because it's such a small fraction of his normal weight, and it's a movement that he's so intimately familiar with that as he gets tired, he can crank through that thing, maintaining only system one decision making, right? Because he's so good at it, it doesn't require any thought to solve the problem. That same workout is a horrible idea for somebody who's had 2 hours of total instruction time in Olympic weightlifting and Olympic weightlifting experience. That person, regardless of how light you make that lift, odds are they don't possess the skill to make it into a conditioning workout, right? So, and it's not to say that you can't use these movements, right? I mean, movements are like tools in an athlete's toolbox. Once they have the skill dialed in, and then they have, that skill is dialed, and now that tool becomes a tool in the toolbox. Their coach can then use the athlete, or have the athlete use the tool, I should say, to achieve whatever the adaptation is. All right. So, and whatever adaptation the tool is appropriate for. Right. So if you're going to teach someone how to sprint, then you're going to want to use that sprint to elicit the kind of adaptations that sprints elicit, which are, increased metabolic rate, strength, power, stuff like that, right? If the athlete doesn't have the tool in their toolbox, doesn't mean that you shouldn't train them in that movement. It just means that training now becomes skill work, not conditioning work or strength work. And it's done under very, very close supervision and minimal duress. So you're not going to do skill work at the end of a workout when you're smoked, right? So I think that's kind of a little bit of a tangent that I rambled off on there. But nonetheless, I think that those are all some pretty important things. So I hope that that was helpful to some degree for you guys to hear me ramble on about some of the intent behind our training. And I really do hope that you can establish a value for the stuff that we're doing and let that value help you make some system one decisions here at some point, so that you just know and you don't have to actively think about whether you're going to keep going and push through the workout or not. And eventually you'll get this awesome dopamine response that just makes you super stoked to do every minute on the minute whatevers, right? And if we're doing our job correctly, that's what'll happen. We won't burn you guys out. You'll be able to do this and know that what you're doing is valuable. And that's really what we're trying to do. So that's it, folks. As a side note, it's taken me like 6 hours to do this podcast because I keep getting interrupted for other things, which is cool. Just want to throw a shout out to our good friend Ray Garrettson, who produces and DJs under the name Finks, like Sphinx, but with no S. And this track that we opened with and I'll close with right now is one of his demos called Desert. And I think it's super cool, incredibly talented guy. And I put his SoundCloud in the show notes, so check him out. And I think that's it for us. We're bouncing. Vanessa's in Paris until maybe the end of next week, and we're out skis. So we'll be off the grid, unavailable. You guys are going to be doing great, having a good time, keeping the awesome, positive beehive cranking while we're gone. And then we'll be back for September, and we'll get this party started all over again. All right, folks, love you all. Thank you so much for being part of our little adventure here, and we'll talk to you soon.